Revenge films.
One day, when our child had just started middle school, my husband said something in a very calm tone when he came back from work.
We need to talk.
I was surprised, and so we sat down. And the first thing he said to me was,
I want a divorce.
I was so shocked, my mouth was wide open. He went on to say,
I've been waiting till a child gets bigger.
Why are you the one who seems sad?
I've been meeting someone.
I knew that my husband was cheating on me. And he had a sad look on his face for leaving me and his child.
I'm very sad. Because of this, I'll give you everything that I own.
I knew that what he had left to his name was nothing. I couldn't stand him thinking his little savings would mean a big deal for us. But while I was getting furious, he went on to say something crazy.
I feel bad for leaving you guys and becoming happy by myself. That's why I'll even leave this house to you as well.
What are you talking about? This is your family house, I shouted.
But I'm saying I'll give this all to you. Aren't you happy? Please take it, for me.
I couldn't stand it that he thought this would be his getaway ticket and I would let him go. Something broke inside me. Why do you think I would enjoy living with your family after we get divorced? When we do, your parents will be complete strangers, you know.
But when we got married, we lived by ourselves, remember? I want to do that again this time, too.
Are you serious? Who would like to live with their stepfamily once they got married? Are you crazy?
I'm giving you a place to live! Thank me and take it!
Are you stupid? I'm leaving this house.
What about my parents? You're horrible!
Horrible? They are your parents. Why do I have to take care of complete strangers for you? This is the first time I ever wanted to kill someone. From his perspective, his parents love our children and didn't want them to be separated. So his brilliant plan was for him to leave the house so they could live together. They have a place to live rent-free, his parents who would be cared for. And he would be able to live with his new girlfriend, which would make everyone happy. That was his plan. FYI, while his parents are still plenty happy, his father is quickly needing more help. He doesn't want to do it himself, and since his mother is old as well, he wants me to take care of them. He would be giving me a place to live, so he thought I wouldn't say no to taking care of them. To think that this man thought that this was a great idea. It makes me sick, and I wanted to get a divorce immediately. I will be leaving this house with my children.
How irresponsible! You have to take care of them!
I told you I'm leaving! Are you stupid? We talked back and forth, and in the end, he said,
If you're leaving, I'm not giving you a penny!
The next day, my children said,
Dad always took care of our cousins more. Grandpa and Grandma too. I don't like how you all treat Mom as well. We don't want to live here.
My stepfamily was shaken from this. My older daughter especially was not fond of my husband for leaving his family for a girlfriend.
I hate you, Dad, for leaving us. And I hate you, Grandpa and Grandma, for taking his side. I don't want to live here.
My husband was constantly butting heads with my daughters as well, and never kept his promise. For example, when my daughter's class observation day came, my husband went to our cousin's class instead of my daughter's. His parents weren't good people either, and step-grandma would say right in front of my daughters that, It's your fault that my son is like this. Step-grandpa went on to say,
If you're gonna fight, we'll fight back!
There is no way you guys are going to win this. And so I had to get a lawyer as well. And when I talked to him about the situation, he said to me,
This will be too easy. You don't need to worry.
My husband seemed to be frustrated at me, and since he wanted to get his daughters back, he got a lawyer too.
If you go to court, you'd lose.
But his lawyer told him he got a ruling without going to court. Apparently, he didn't tell his lawyer what he had done about the affair and his parents to his lawyer. But because lawyers are smart, he was able to figure out his lies. And he soon gave up on going to court with me. And his girlfriend wanted to get married quickly, and so our divorce was very quickly accepted. I was able to get alimony from him for a long time, as well as get alimony from the girlfriend as well. My daughters and I were prepping to move out along the way, so we decided to move into a small apartment. They told me they were not going to pay me anything, and of course, that was not the case. So I got all the alimony I requested. I got the rights to my children as well, and even thought they did not care about my daughters before this whole incident. My stepmother finally began to say things like, "Give me back my grandchildren, you monster!" I couldn't take it anymore, so I told them, "I don't care anymore. You guys are not related." I felt somewhat relieved from all the stress I had carried over the years. Our new life, just the three of us, was very easy because my children were also somewhat big. In fact, we were all relieved from the stress, so we seemed much more happy. I was worried about my children and getting a divorce, but we all seemed to laugh more because we were less stressed out. After this, I would meet his family members outside.
Hello.
Hello.
I heard you got a divorce.
Yeah. I knew they would figure out soon, but I didn't want to drag this out any longer.
I heard they're having a tough time now.
Huh?
The father's back is in bad condition, so he's asleep all day now. Your ex-husband was so excited to go out of the house, but his mother wouldn't be able to take care of him alone, right? So she had him to stay, but he refused because he wanted to enjoy his new marriage life. But then his mother began to scream for money for a helper or a nursery home, and they're in a pretty big fight.
I see. I was trying very hard not to laugh. This person loved gossip, so I didn't need to ask more to hear from her what happened. After she explained the story to me, I said, "I see, he's having a tough time, but please do tell him my children and I are doing amazing right now." That person was going to tell them, that's for sure. Thank God. I thought I made a great revenge story. Just imagining the look on their face once they hear the news that the people they treated poorly were living a happier life than they were.
We banter and crack jokes because we love each other. It's a sure sign we trust each other. Such was the opinion of my ex-boyfriend. I would accept a small amount of offensive jokes, of course, but for my ex-boyfriend, it was far over the line. During the winter of my third year in university, I was up to my ears in job hunting. He was also right in the heat of his job hunting too, and we met because we went to the same seminar. After all 8 classes were done, I was just about to head home when he called after me and suddenly confessed his feelings about me. This happened quite suddenly, so I was a little hesitant at first, but he was quite decent in looks and seemed a kind person. To be safe, we started by exchanging our emails, and I tried going on a few dates with him. Then I decided to be together with him. It was when I was cooking at his place, right after we became a couple. He crept and peered over from behind, and I heard him mutter under his breath,
That looks disgusting.
"What was that?" I asked as I turned around. I didn't believe what I heard, but he was watching TV without any change of emotion in his face. "It's almost done."
Oh, I'm excited.
That convinced me I was just hearing things, so I forgot about it and brought the cooking over to the table. And after setting the curry and rice and potato salad down,
Okay, looks like you managed to make it look like people food.
this time I definitely heard him right. I was a little surprised. Scratch that, I was very surprised, but maybe how it looks could use some work, but I think the taste is good enough. I sort of sacrificed my dignity as a cook, but it was what I should have done to reassure him.
Is that so? That's good then.
Then, as a spoonful of curry no more than touched his tongue,
This is awful. I'm gonna throw up.
this was making me angry, needless to say. Well then, you don't have to eat it anymore. I started to take the food away, but he stopped me vigorously.
I'm eating this surely as I say it tastes terrible, aren't I? We're a couple, right? So you don't say it's delicious even if you think so. We banter each other like that.
In what universe was it logical for him to get upset and say such nonsense? In the end, he uttered how terrible it tasted until he ate up everything on his plate.
Woo! That was good. Thanks, honey.
Although he was honest that time, I already started to lose my trust in him. Sometime later, I wore some new clothes on our date.
Are those new clothes? You look like a clown. I'm embarrassed to walk in public with the likes of you.
What the hell? Well then, I'll go back home and change into better clothes.
How about you notice I'm actually over the moon and think you look really cute?
To tell you the truth, I had no idea where to even begin to understand this train of thought. Even after that, throughout the date, his anger never died down completely and was cranky. It was stupid to try to fix things, so I never said anything about it. After a long silence,
You're such a big blah, you know that?
this was getting too ridiculous. Shall we break up then?
There's no way I'd be with you if you were a big blah. Of course, I like you so much. Imagine not catching what I mean.
He then tried to kiss me as he tried to look handsome. Chills ran down my spine, but perhaps he misinterpreted my situation.
You're blushing. You're so cute.
Sirens started wailing within me, screaming that something was very wrong with this guy. So in a panic, I said, I'm not feeling too well, so I'm heading home now, okay? And went home in the middle of our date. Later on, he would interact with me in this manner, and when I asked him to stop, he would get upset and criticize me for not reading between his lines. Meanwhile, whenever I got upset, he would interpret that as something worthy of his affection. My feelings for him became even colder, and I began to want to break up with him. Eventually, an event that accelerated that to light speed would take place. It was when he was practicing the guitar. I teased in his manner, "Oh, you're so bad at the guitar, I think my ears are bleeding." He suddenly punched me in the face and the gut with all his might. At first, I hadn't a clue what had happened. All I did was give him a taste of his own medicine and reciprocated his chastising my cooking and my clothing style in the same manner. I never expected my face would be the punching bag. When I looked up at him,
How dare you!
I was shocked at the fury in his body and in his voice. I started to cry from the pain and from shock, and I told him, practically screaming, I said my ears were bleeding while I was never covering them, so obviously I mean that you're really good. Imagine not catching what I mean.
In that case, shouldn't you say so honestly? Don't you dare look down on someone working hard on something. God, that pisses me off so much.
Well, what about you then? What was it you said about my cooking when I worked hard to make it for us? All I did was exactly the same as you always do to me. I hightailed it out of there and went straight to the police, telling him that he hit me. Chasing after me, he said with police officers in front of him,
This is my woman. There's something between us that none of you will understand.
I was completely through with him at this point, and the pain in my face after that furious punch was unbearable. So I told him, crying, with a tissue against my bleeding nose, there is no chemistry. That's just him being stupid. Please arrest him under charge of offense. He was arrested on the spot, and I was taken to a hospital because the bleeding didn't stop. After the examination, I found out my nose was broken. The hospital contacted my parents, and my mother swooned at the horrific sight of my swollen, disfigured face. My father's face turned red with anger, and swore to find out who did this, and ferociously stormed out to find the main doctor who took care of me. I was then hospitalized for a few days, and my parents hired a passionate lawyer for me, and working with them, I went to demand compensation from him. With my lawyer before him, he apparently said,
That's just my version of humor. It's her fault. She never understood what I truly meant.
He put up a fight to lessen the demands for compensation. But what with him doing damage big time to a girl's face, that kind of excuse would never work. And in the end, I got a total of 800,000 yen. Of course, he and I broke up. During the last phone call, I told the bastard everything that had been welling up in my heart for a long while.
Shut your goddamn mouth, you bitch! We banter and crack jokes because we love each other. It's a sure sign we trust each other.
Huh? Banter and crack jokes because we love each other? A sure sign we trust each other? Have you ever heard of the saying, good fences make good neighbors? Your dumbass tells people to read between the lines. Read between the lines? How about you freaking realize you're the one who never reads people's emotions? All the consequences for bantering and cracking jokes are bound to bounce back, and you better run for your life. Goodbye now. Later, I started to get ridiculous messages from him on Snapchat.
Ah, today was another great day! So, when are the consequences coming to bite my ass?
It was so annoying. So I completely ignored them and focused wholeheartedly on job hunting. This landed me a job pretty early. It was right around then that the messages stopped. I was just about to get a new phone anyway, and it no longer mattered if he messaged me or not. But apparently, he became a victim of job hunting neurosis and became a recluse. As those around him were offered jobs, he was never offered anything even after applying to dozens of companies. And that's what he deserves, since he apparently kept the same stupid, stubborn attitude during his interviews. Of course, his friends and peers also told him,
Dude, maybe you should be careful what you do and say. Do you really not see how rude the things you say actually are? I don't want to be the likes of anyone annoying like you.
People kept their distance from him. Even so, he would still say,
Oh, come on! Read between the lines at least a little, guys!
That made me realize how much of a jellyfish he really is, not learning anything from his mistakes or from what people tell him. I felt sad. He'll probably just go deeper into the life of a recluse without ever knowing why. And he'll become even more lonely, claiming that he's not the one to blame. But I think it's great. There'll be less people to be victims of his bird brain attitude if he remains a recluse. The mouth is the source of disaster, the saying that brought the darkness and perfectly fits his pathetic life. All I can say is good riddance.
My name is Thomas Ahab, and I'm 55 years old. Such as I to retire in 5 years, and I have a wife of 26 years, Kira. Usually what happens is that couples prepare for retirement, and once they do, they go on relaxing trips together, or they would find a new sport to keep fit and stay healthy. That wasn't the case for me. Our relationship as husband and wife has now dwindled to nothing. It all started 5 years ago. One day, soon as I just turned 50, I was feeling the slight pain in my chest from the morning, and I felt slightly breathless. But 2 days prior to that, I'd brought in 3 boxes of plastic bottles filled with water from the car, so I thought it was just a muscle strain at first. But by evening, the pain had turned into something violent, like my chest was being carved. It felt like red-hot chopsticks plunged into my heart, and I broke out in a cold sweat from the pain. Little by little, it became harder to breathe, and nausea came along. I couldn't move whatsoever anymore, and I was worried and scared that this pain would actually become the death of me. Shifting in and out of consciousness, the idea of calling an ambulance simply never came to me, and I asked my wife, "My chest hurts. Could you please look for a clinic that takes clients on Sundays and call them about the situation?" She was eating snacks and watching TV at that time. She never stopped moving her hand between her snack and her mouth, and she said,
Oh, I don't want to do that. Plus, you can talk, so don't you think you can do all that yourself? Go on now.
She gave me my phone. Clutching my chest like it was my life, I searched for a clinic and called them.
Get to a big hospital at once!
That was what the doctor said, and that made me jump. Then I immediately searched for the nearest large hospital and found that it was still pretty far away. My wife doesn't have a driver's license and thus cannot drive. My son can drive, but he was living alone and going to university in another city. Meanwhile, the excruciating pain that had gone on for more than 20 minutes never wavered, and instead kicked up in intensity. I couldn't stand anymore, and I collapsed on the couch. "Call a taxi, please! I can't drive in this condition!" I desperately asked my wife, to which she replied,
What the? You're kidding, right? Do you have any idea how much it would cost driving about 30 minutes by taxi? Get over there with your own car.
Now that I remember all this, I'm so pissed, but at the time I was panicking, so I desperately pleaded, "The money I'll pay out of my own pocket, so please!" By then it was almost impossible to speak as well. Speech became much too painful, so I just lay there and started to moan. My wife, seeing me in such a state, said,
Oh, stop it, silly. It's just a muscle strain.
she was laughing. My mind and my consciousness were a complete mess, and thinking this was starting to get dangerous, in a final attempt at mercy, I blurted, "Call an ambulance, please!"
All right. You want an ambulance, is that it? Jesus.
Then that woman went and started doing her makeup.
Good grief. Such a nuisance.
For 10 minutes, she muttered nasty things under her breath. She called 911 after she was done with her makeup. Even while we were waiting for them to arrive, she would say stuff like,
Waiting for an ambulance. How disgraceful. What do you expect me to say to the neighbors if all this just turns out to be a muscle strain?
She was angry, needless to say. But I couldn't get my voice out anymore, and I couldn't say anything back to her. Later, I was taken to the hospital and got an electrodiogram. I was promptly taken to what seemed to be an operating room, and my doctors inserted catheters into the base of my legs. It was a myocardial infraction. Chills descended down my spine when the doctor told me, "You were so strong, not succumbing to the pain for all that time. If it was any longer, it would have been game over." I was also told, "At times like these, do not hesitate to call an ambulance." As I was hospitalized, I had more time than ever to think about many things. My wife and I were arranged to be married. I don't know what she thought of me, but my first impression of her was that she was a simple woman, but still clean and beautiful. She seemed perfect in my eyes. I accepted her wishes of becoming a housewife because she was, quote, weak-minded and easily tired, and I worked my damnedest to never make her do any unnecessary work. I wanted my only child, my son, to go to university too. And although the pay wasn't exactly anything to boast about, I think it was enough to build an ordinary house life. Luckily, I also inherited some land from my parents' will, and we were able to build a house there. I knew my wife couldn't work because of her innate conditions, so I signed myself up for good insurance if the worst ever happened, and they were left alone to survive by themselves. I don't mean to brag, but on our wedding anniversary, I would buy her bouquets, and on her 10th, I got her a ring. I wouldn't know what she thought unless I asked her, but I'm confident that I lived life with my family as my top priority these last 25 years. But this event enabled me to see something clearly for the first time in all these years. It would seem I wasn't as important to her as I'd hoped I was. Luckily, everything went smoothly thereafter, and I left the hospital after 3 weeks. After I left, I started thinking about that day, and about divorce. It wasn't that I didn't have feelings for her anymore after such a long time, but I thought it wouldn't be possible to be with her, and I felt a void whenever I was with her. But my son is still a student. He's living on his own, but soon job hunting and his graduation thesis would make him quite busy, and I didn't want to give more pressure over a divorce. So after I came home, I played the part of her regular husband, and went on living with her as usual. Later, my son got a job and graduated from university. And 3 years later now, after he set himself up nicely in his work, I finally decided to separate from my wife. When I told him, and only him, about my wishes, he said, "You've done all your duties as a parent, Dad. You do what you please. I'm sorry if you were keeping things at bay for my sake, and thanks." What an angel.
You know, Mom was like that for a while. She thinks she comes before everything else. I knew from when I was in elementary school.
Frankly, I felt ashamed as a parent. Soon after, I filed for divorce. My wife resisted by saying she has no idea the reason why. She's done her duties as a good wife. She doesn't remember any talk about divorce and stuff like that. A few days after that, her elderly mother stopped by and asked after my reasons for divorcing her daughter. When I told her about that day,
I mean, I must admit my daughter is at fault, but I don't know if it's solid grounds for divorce.
"Mother, if you were in that situation, would you forgive Kira for acting like she did?" She remained silent when I asked my mother-in-law that question. Even afterwards, my wife started nagging.
I hated when you did that time, or when you said this a few years ago. Nag, nag, nag.
"You're in no position to say that."
Why do you say all this now? You could have said all this when it happened. It's usual for a married couple to talk about some things each party didn't approve of. Why do we have to go all the way here?
Good grief, the nagging! It took a while for her to see enough sense to go along with it. We arbitrated and argued for close to 6 months, but I eventually succeeded in dividing the fortune as is legally usual and divorcing her. Our pension would also be divided, and we made the divorce terms agreeable for her. But then she would say,
You're literally ruining someone's life plan and not doing anything to make repairs. I did my best with the housework and the child upbringing. Normally, I would demand for my share of your severances.
She just wasn't satisfied with the amount that she got, and basically never acknowledged her faults. Never noticing her true colors during these 26 years is probably the biggest mistake here. 6 months after divorcing her, I'm finally getting used to living alone. At first, to lower my hypertension, I was making low-salt meals, which was hard to say the least. But now, since I found out that I can get low-salt meals delivered at regular intervals, I'm doing just that. All I have to do is microwave it once I get home from work. But even so, they're pretty delicious. I'm a simpleton after all. I was busy as a bee, balancing work and household chores. It took a while to get used to. But I feel like my life is a lot more peaceful. As for my ex, I'm kinda relieved to say that she remarried a year after our divorce.
My cousin, older than me by 12 years, was engaged to be married, and I was often told that she was the spitting image of me. I mean, we both looked similar to her grandmother. Grandma was a beautiful woman, and was once the model of a famous artist. She was arranged to be married to my grandfather, a military and the second son of a renowned family, against her will by her parents. Not that they would inherit anything, since he's the second son. He was a military man, and according to her parents, that was good enough, apparently. He died in the war, so life after the war was really hard. She also didn't like my father, who looked like her deceased husband. They were living together, but were always at each other's throats the entire time. Both steaming, they tried to get my mother over to their side. And, as her first grandchild, she showered my cousin, who looked a lot like her, with love. Although I also look like Grandma, I'm not as attractive as her and my older cousin. My cousin and I, a beauty who had a national qualification in her field, and a businesswoman who never went to college, were as different as sun and moon. My cousin's fiancé is 5 years younger than her, and much to the satisfaction of my show-off grandmother, he was very well educated and had a good salary. In terms of looks, he was average. I wore the kimono I just recently worn for my coming of age to the wedding, and I went to greet her fiancé when we went to try her outfits on. Looking upon me for the first time, he said,
You look so much like your cousin, huh?
and seemed very surprised. My session of trying clothes on pretty much ended as my cousin finished hers, and I headed back to the waiting room, feeling like I was her attendant. Her fiancé, upon seeing her, was overwhelmed and just sat there, motionless in white, and unable to utter a single word. Then things like introducing close family relatives and whatnot came and went, and the wedding began in the form of a Shinto ceremony. I sat on the seat closest to the stage at the closest relatives table and was taking videos. It was the first time I'd been to a Shinto wedding, so I was staring to the screen with much curiosity. As things went on, the groom suddenly threw the sacred Shinto tree to the ground and said,
You know what? Screw this! I object!
leaving everyone in shocked disbelief. Of course, I was shocked too. I've been invited to the wedding of colleagues and friends before this occasion, but I'd never seen one end in shambles like this one. The audience started to stir, and a few members started getting dizzy with shock. No doubt people were wondering how this chaotic atmosphere could be dealt with. The groom uttered something that was impossibly to swallow.
I'm gonna stop this wedding, and I want to marry that girl!
Who is that girl? As they were thinking this, all the eyes present turned onto me. I had no idea what was happening, and I turned to look behind me thinking, is there someone behind me? But of course, no one was there. Why? Why me? As I was panicking over being left in the dark over all this, Grandma strode to face me. And then she struck me in the face with all her might. No one had ever struck me before, and I was left in a shocked daze. My mind was blank. Grandma glared at me with a murderous look in her eyes and asked me, So you stole our fiancé? When they came over to greet us, I'll bet. I wasn't home when they came to greet us. Yours isn't someone decent, so you went after your cousin's fiancé. That's not true. I barely know the groom, and my partner isn't someone indecent. It's true. My boyfriend is a senior from my high school, and it's true he's from a school that's at the bottom of the barrel. Whenever he's at my grandma's place, he wears casual clothes and he wears piercings, has hair dyed brown, and drives a luxurious sports car. He may not be to grandma's liking, but he's a good boyfriend to me, and I love him dearly. Who's surprised, you ask? It's me, and no one but me, being told something like that out of the blue. Besides being spoken to like that, I couldn't forgive anyone, even Grandma, for talking about him that way. No matter how many times I denied her suspicions, she would grab me by the collar and shake me back and forth. My family had to try to break her away from me in the end, but she would fly into a tantrum, and no one could even touch her. That was when the groom stepped in and shouted,
She isn't the one to blame.
That heated Grandma up even more. Even so, right as I noticed he was coming towards me, he grabbed my hand and said,
Please, marry me.
The room erupted uproariously, but the Shinto had had enough and ordered everyone to leave, and the reception was canceled. It became a negotiation session in a meeting room, or a room like that. The groom said that the reason behind his change of heart was actually because though my cousin and I looked the same, we were too different. My cousin would get older and eventually look uglier as time went on. But on the other hand, I was young, and he said that I was as beautiful as when he first met my cousin. That immediately made him think that my cousin looked unattractive. So damn stupid. It's too obvious. The age gap between my cousin and I isn't something inconsequential. Even I'm axiomatically gonna look older and more wrinkly as I gain more years. Too different, my ass. My cousin's face was all in white, while mine donned regular makeup, albeit a little stylish. He had the audacity to say that the white makeup made her look poofy and cracked, and that my skin looked smooth and shiny. Was he thinking those are compliments directed at me? My parents were also present at that time, and they were furious at how Grandma overreacted. But, of course, the wedding was destroyed. Grandma never ceased to cast aspirations towards me, saying I was the one who drove it all to oblivion. So I brought my boyfriend home sometime so they all see him before, and regardless of his looks, they approved of him as a good guy with a focused personality. So as a response to how ill Grandma spoke of him,
Susan's man is not a bad kid.
Dad was trying to soothe Grandma, but her ideology that it was all my fault never faltered. Probably because they were in the best of relationships from the start. Destroying my beautiful girl's wedding like that. You better compensate for this. It's because of a brat like you that my darling isn't too happy right now. It just got worse with every passing day. In addition to this, the groom, whose name was Cliff, started to hover around me a lot. He somehow got a hold of my contact info and sent me messages saying,
I love you, Susan. Let's get married.
I replied with, I have a dear boyfriend, so I'm not able to reciprocate your feelings. But he sent back,
Well, then let's first go out together. Then you'll come to understand how much I love you, Susan.
How do you expect me to tolerate such bullshit? On top of that, he managed to find out where I lived, and he exhibited stalker-like behavior like waiting for it to get home from my work. I thought about going to the police, but me being the reason why the wedding was a sham, plus getting Cliff arrested would make my cousin the laughingstock all the more. But the news of Cliff's stalking eventually made its way to my boyfriend, and he bravely repelled Cliff away while he was waiting for my return from work. He couldn't forgive the stalker that Cliff is, it seems, but he was steamed much more over the fact that Cliff's over-the-top selfishness not only made me unhappy, but also my cousin. Grandma cared for only my cousin for a long time, but my cousin herself, with me being so similar to her, treated me and cared about me like I was her own sister. So she often talked ill about Grandma, showering only her with her love. My cousin is like a big sister to me. Grandma brutally held me responsible for the catastrophe, but my cousin would say, It's not your fault, Susan. She was even worried about me. She knew about Grandma acting as she did, so maybe she couldn't give her all the more because of it. In the end, the news that Cliff was stalking me reached her ears too, and she told me,
You kept all this at bay just for me. I'm so sorry about that, dear, but you should go to the police.
She pushed me into doing it, and that drove me to reporting Cliff to the feds. He was arrested under the law for stalker control. As for Grandma, Dad kicked her out for aggressively attacking his daughter, and was later admitted to a home without any discussion. I never met her since. Later, I married my beloved and had a child with him. After being arrested, Cliff signed a restraining order against me and then disappeared. After her first wedding was destroyed, my cousin met with a wonderful man, and this time got married without anything going wrong. I know that nothing would change whether or not it was my fault, but I thought it would bring bad luck if I attended her wedding again, so I refused her invitation once, but...
You're like a sister to me, you know? Please celebrate my wedding on this happy day with me.
So I went with my fiancé. She donned a wedding dress for her second wedding. Seeing the new newlyweds beside my own fiancé, I was beside myself with happiness.
My wife is, not to be mean or anything, but the perfect housewife. She's beautiful, knows how to cook and clean, and is always supporting me to the best. But one day, I got a call from her during work. I knew she would never do such a thing, so I knew something bad had happened. I rushed to answer the phone and heard her panicking voice, as well as her brother yelling in the back.
Are you kidding me? You think crying will solve this?
And things I couldn't make out. I rushed to my boss to explain what had happened and asked to go back home. I quickly did and found my wife outside the house. And the inside was a horrible mess. I checked to see if my wife was okay and was glad to find out she was. I went inside and saw my brother-in-law yelling next to his girlfriend, who I knew, and my mother and sister sitting on the floor. I was shocked to see the situation, but was soon met with a punch from the girlfriend. Because I wasn't prepared, I hit the floor and started to bleed from my lips. Ow! I got up and noticed that my mother and sister's face were bruised as well. And once I knew it, I was sitting on the floor next to them, getting yelled at by my brother-in-law and his girlfriend. And from what they were saying, I learned that my mother and sister were abusing my wife. They would come to our house when I wasn't there, make her cook food, say it was horrible, and throw it out. She would even call my wife out to their house to do housework. Because my wife was perfect, she would be able to do what they asked, which annoyed them even more. And so they went on to borrow her clothes and accessories, to steal and even sell some things for money. They even told her to go buy 1-liter bottles of water for emergencies. The girlfriend saw her carrying a large box of water and called the brother-in-law to explain to him the situation. But my wife said nothing. They went back to the house where they saw my mother and sister eating snacks on the couch, doing nothing. They didn't notice who walked in, and my mother said, as per usual,
Why can't you be much faster, you garbage? How about you message me then?
The girlfriend suspected this was when she first saw my wife, but hearing this from my mother made her snap, and she drop-kicked my mother. My sister started to scream, and my brother-in-law began to punch them. And this was when my wife called me. I didn't notice any of this was happening, was daydreaming at work. I realized that my own family was abusing my wife, and so I started to cry and went to my wife to apologize to her. She then said,
I'm sorry for not talking to you about this first.
and started to cry, so we softly hugged. Then the girlfriend said,
I knew it. It wasn't his fault, but you, old lady.
and started to call someone. FYI, brother-in-law and his girlfriend were very famous gang members back when they were young. The reason she was able to drop-kick me and my mother was that. When they were young, they would go and talk to my wife about their lives, and it was because of my wife they were able to recourse their lives, get a steady job, and live like they are right now. And that was why they were so furious about my mother and sister abusing her. I agree with them on that. Brother-in-law asked me,
What are you planning to do with them?
and so I looked straight ahead and said, they are not my family anymore. The only person I'll protect is my wife. I'll never see those two again. I'll let you two decide on what happens to them.
All right, I'll do what I want to them.
He said back to me. Hearing this, mother and sister quickly said,
What are you talking about? We're your mother and sister. Do you have any idea what they are going to do to us?
what are you talking about? How could you do this to such a perfect daughter-in-law? She's done everything you ask, and this is how you treat her? My mother looked shocked from what I said. Then, we heard the sound of cars and bikes all around us. My mother and sister looked shocked, and brother-in-law and his girlfriend called in their subordinates. My wife asked her brother in a very worried face.
What are you planning to do? I'm fine. You don't have to do anything.
We're normal citizens now. We can't do anything bad. We're just gonna drive them home,
he said, and everyone and their sirens left the house. My wife was worried, but they were really just sent home. But their subordinates constantly called them bullies all the way home. I couldn't understand why my mother and sister would abuse my perfect wife like this. But later I learned from a different sibling that mother and sister didn't like how my wife was constantly liked by everyone anywhere she went. Especially my sister, who couldn't stand how much beautiful my wife was. And they teamed up to bully my wife. My wife was just trying to get along with them. I couldn't stand them, and I couldn't say anything that would cheer up my wife. Brother-in-law and his girlfriend just brought them home. Because their subordinates were so loud, everyone in the neighborhood came out to check what was happening. Then the subordinates told everyone in the neighborhood about what they had done in detail. My wife's perfection was very famous around the neighborhood, and I would get compliments everywhere I went in the neighborhood too. A neighbor was so furious she went to my mother and sister and said,
How could you do such horrible things to her? Why could you do that to such a wonderful girl?
They tried to talk back, but because they were surrounded by 20 gang members, they could not and simply bobbed their heads. After this, I decided we needed to move out of the neighborhood because I didn't want my wife to see them ever again. She looked worried and said,
I'm fine. You don't have to do this.
But this was to protect her and show that I cared for her. I talked to brother-in-law too and promised him I would protect her and keep her safe no matter what. They might run into each other in the streets, and because my wife was kind, she would keep it to herself again. So I made the decision to move out of the city with her. But my mother and sister's rumor spread all across the city. So when they walk outside, people would say,
Look, it's those bullies. They're the reason why the couple moved out. They're such horrible people.
These rumors pushed them into becoming shut-ins. Because she was made to go shopping for mother and sister, most of the shops knew my wife and what had happened. So they can't even go shopping now. As for us, we are living a happy life in a different city. It takes me much longer to commute, but the good luck today from my wife is enough to keep me going every day. My name is Haruo Mubita. This story isn't about me, but something happened recently that made me think it served them right in the end. These days, I started to notice a very extravagant foreign car in the parking lot outside the mansion where I live. What was strange was that this is the kind of mansion that the filthy rich folk would live in, but one for students or for a single office worker. That's why it was spooky and natural that the car was parked outside such a place. The car remained parked non-stop for around 2 weeks, so I assumed someone new had moved into the building. It was on a Sunday evening when I was getting the laundry that had been drying on my veranda. I was done with that and just looked down at the parking lot without thinking of anything when a car drove in and parked right in front of the expensive car, like literally a hair's width away from touching it. Thinking about it like the letter T, the expensive car parked first was the perpendicular line, and the cheap car was the horizontal line, blocking the exit of the other car. The driver of the cheap car simply went inside the mansion after getting their luggage without moving the car at all. So I thought, could that expensive car belong to an acquaintance or a friend of theirs? There wasn't anything noteworthy afterwards, so I completely settled on the idea that they knew each other. And after making dinner, I ate with the window open. Perhaps 30 minutes had passed when I heard the sound of a spamming car horn. Beep, beep! I brushed it away, convinced that someone had illegally parked in someone else's spot, and relaxed in front of the television. But beep, 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 beep! The intensity of the car horn increased. What the hell is that stupid racket? Annoyed by the loud sounds, I stormed outside and looked down upon the parking lot. I then found out the sound came from a woman who was the driver of the expensive car, spamming the horn. The woman appeared to be in her 40s or 50s and had these huge sunglasses that literally covered her whole face. She also wore extravagant clothes. She's honking at the cheap car that was parked in front of her. The expensive car was blocked by the cheap one and thus couldn't get out. It seems the owners of each car did not know each other. But if that's the case, why did the driver of the first car decide to park their car in front of the expensive one? I formed a hypothesis as I studied the situation. My conclusion goes like this. The owner of the cheap car knew the expensive car never budged during a certain time and thought they were parking illegally. Then the woman opened her window and shouted in a loud voice.
To someone who owns this cheap car, please hurry and come out here. Hurry up and move it. It's inconveniencing me. I'm in a terrible rush.
The woman shouted this numerous times and continued to slam the horn, but the driver of the cheap car never showed. 30 more minutes passed, and the other tenants of the mansion were like, "What's going on?"
What the hell is taking so long?
Like typical onlookers, they started to appear on their verandas. Passerbys also asked the woman inside, "What's going on here?" Obviously, I couldn't eavesdrop on how the woman answered them, being too far, but I could hear a kind male pedestrian suggesting, "Shall we contact the police?" to the woman, but the woman answered,
The police won't be necessary.
and sent the kind man on his merry way. Afterwards, the woman started shouting,
Does anyone know the owner of this car? I'm at such a loss. I can't get my car out. Hurry up and move it out of the way.
I'd seen them leave the car, but I didn't have a clue who the man that got out of the car was, and he looked intimidating, so I kept my mouth shut. After some time, perhaps 3 hours, the driver of the cheap car walked straight up to the woman. The relief that swept over me with the thought that everything would now be solved lasted but a moment. The man asked the woman in a booming voice,
Why are you even been parked on this space?
"Now wait a minute, says you, who illegally parked in front of her. You should say you're sorry first." I retorted to him, but I'm a coward, so I only retorted in my mind, obviously.
I'm in a hurry. I'll be bothered if you don't hurry up and move it out of the way.
Of course.
I was going to leave quickly, but because you parked here like this, I couldn't get out at all.
Heyo?
No one was there, so I only borrowed it a little bit.
Wait. What? Here I realized a small mistake I made. Turns out it was the woman who was parking illegally. But you can't blame me for making a mistake. She was wearing clothes that screamed style, while the dude not only had an intimidating face, but donned his whole body with black and wore a necklace around his neck. So no matter how much you tried, you would always end up assuming he's some high school dropout. Summarizing the transaction that followed, the man left his flat empty for a month because of his job. And the woman wrongly assumed the tenant had moved away and that his parking space was available, and frequently used it to pay a visit to a friend who lives in another mansion nearby. I guess she never thought the true tenant would come back. She claimed she was only using the parking space for a little bit, and in the slim event they returned, she foolishly thought that only a quick blare of the horn would get an apology and the parking space back. You'd think the strong-faced guy would now move his car out of the way, problem solved. But no, he went on to say,
I already drank a bit, so I can't drive. You'll just have to wait until tomorrow. If you can't wait until then, hire a tow truck yourself and haul it out of the way. But don't you dare damage my damn car.
He started walking away, but the woman retorted to him.
Now hang on just a minute. How much do you think hiring a tow truck costs?
Furthermore, she shouted,
There's no way I can wait until tomorrow. I'm in big trouble if my husband finds out.
So in other words, the woman was going to her lover's place this whole time.
If you say you've drunk a little and can't drive, I'll drive your car out of the way for you. So, would you give me your keys?
It's a drag to my car keys that are back in my flat. I'm tired from a long business trip, so you better wait until tomorrow, or take care of the situation yourself. I'm out.
Wait a minute. How cruel. This is too much.
The woman, who apparently closeted her admitting she's to blame, started shouting, half crying, that he was cruel and cold, and the dude never did look back as he walked away. Guy never came back out after that, and even afterwards, the woman would go on spamming her horn, enough to be acknowledged as a neighborhood nuisance. She was yelling at the guy to come back out, and someone called the police. This whole thing blew up into a frenzy. Embarrassingly.
And you came out here to help me. I can't go home. Do something.
No matter how many times the woman called someone who is allegedly her lover for help, they never showed up. Apparently, the police don't normally interfere with matters of illegal parking on privately owned spaces, but just couldn't leave the racket not attended to, so after giving the woman a fair warning, they left. As though it never happened, the racket quickly died as the woman stood there motionless and white. All the other tenants of the building and I were finally able to relax. I didn't pay attention after that, so I wouldn't know what happened. But the expensive car and the cheap car were gone the next morning. So maybe the woman actually did wait until morning for the guy to move his car. Also, I never saw that luxury car in the neighborhood again after that, so I'm assuming she and her lover separated. Maybe the guy who owned the cheap car went a little overboard, but I have experience in someone parking in my space, so my gut tells me he did a good job with the situation.
My husband cheated on me. From the start, he didn't have particularly handsome looks, and his income wasn't anything impressive. But he's kind and honest, and he's always smiling. That infatuated me, and I married him. We're both working parents, and we have 2 daughters. I worked, did the housework, and brought up the children with his help. But he cheated on me. The girl is a young Miss Anna from our company. Miss A never knew her father, and is probably into older men who are kind to all creatures great and small, like my husband. He was never good with keeping secrets, and I quickly saw that was wrong. I never thought he could actually cheat, but when I asked him out of concern, his attitude was strange through and through. I abode by my shame and asked my friend at the company, who works in surveillance. She introduced me to a reasonable expert, and I had him investigate. Results didn't take long to pour in. My husband and that young girl were very much in love, and no one noticed. They only intended to keep their affair a secret. Just a few photos of them entering and leaving a hotel were enough, but the expert even managed to video them doing it in the car. I was shell-shocked. I was traumatized, and there were also a part of me who didn't want to believe all of this. I wondered how I would interact with him onward, but seeing his silhouette in the front window of his car, moving with rhythm, I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous it looked. Thanks to that, I never had much stress about it at all. This isn't to say I had none whatsoever. There was some discord later on, but we smoothly got to the point of a divorce. My children are not at an age to be lied to anymore, one being in high school and the other in middle school. They apparently suspected something was wrong with their father when they were observing me. In the end, I showed my husband the proof of his affair and demanded compensation from the both of them. As a result, I got the compensation, of course, and some of his insubstantial savings, custody over my children, and child support. I actually thought they put up more of a fuss, or say they didn't want to pay, but they were both in high spirits. And
I really am sorry, but our love is...
I'm sorry, but I think I've truly fallen in love with your husband.
Can't remember exactly, but you get the gist. But it seemed to me they were excited that they had this sort of forbidden love between them. They were both thinking it was an obstacle, and that if he had simply divorced me and paid the compensation, they would finally be together. Maybe they were hoping for something like a messy divorce that I refused to accept, but still their love wouldn't break and would become even more pure. Or some nonsense like that. To be honest, my inner feelings were indeed all jumbled up and whatnot. But I look at him now and see an ass that I decided to didn't need anymore. Relations between each other and our family were anything but strained, and I'm not sure what my daughters were thinking of the fact they'd be separated from their father because of his affair, but it seems they don't intend to forgive him for betraying and abandoning his family. What was worse, while they were alone in the house, my daughters just happened to be looking for something, discovered some more proof in the dresser. That confirmed what they thought, and since then they looked at their father with contempt. And so, the divorce was final, and my husband became my ex. Our children were grown already, so there wasn't any substantial difference in our lives, and they started to help me out much more, now that I'm a single mother. My lovely daughters put helping me at the top of their priorities. My eldest would already made dinner by the time I came home, and my youngest would have cleaned the house. When our daughters were born, he was overjoyed because he wanted adorable little girls as his children. But I was never this thankful to have two wonderful girls to call my own. My eldest's cooking tasted exactly like mine, and my methodical youngest rendered every nook and cranny spotless. Even though I'd become a single mother, because of my daughters who understood how hard that would be, I was blessed and saved. And with the compensation from the both of them, we're financially secure for the time being. My ex later remarried, but I heard through the grapevine that it was a catastrophe. All things considered, their life together never became what they envisioned, and the girl lost interest especially. Perhaps becoming a regular couple you could just find out walking at the park without much stimulating experiences was what caused her to lose interest. They were very much into each other because I was between them, but after getting married, they never had to keep it a secret anymore. Maybe she had no need of love without obstacles. In the end, the girl ran away back home and later divorced him just like that. One day, my ex was kneeling in front of our front porch for a long time. I asked my children just in case, what should we do?
Leave him.
That was all they said. My youngest never said anything. Whether someone reported him, I'm not sure, but the police stopped by to see if everything was okay. After I told them, we're already divorced and he has his own place to stay. They took him away, probably to where he lives. Well, I do think he's repenting, but I can't forgive the fact that maybe this third eye opened when his second wife left him, and could get back together with me. In other words, if that one vetoes, this one's better. And that's cringe. If you betrayed me and your own children, at least show some sure sign that you're set on never returning. Pathetic. To be honest, I never thought things would last between those two. After I found out about their affair and made my demands,
We'll get over anything that stands in our way.
We'll never drift apart, even if someone tries to break us apart.
I'm sorry. I can't adhere to what you want anymore.
Your children probably hate us, don't they? What with their father being stolen from them?
such things you find in cheesy drama shows were uttered without hull. So I began to think the heat would only last so long before it cooled down to bitter nothingness. That's why I could relate to my ex coming to beg for forgiveness. But what was more vital was that I wasn't going to let him back into a home where its own children look at him contemptuously. Of course, I couldn't forgive myself either. They were all for the divorce after seeing that video, and it must have been a big shock to them. I knew that the bigger the fuss got up, the more it would benefit their cause, so I quickly made legal arrangements for a divorce. What makes this story so funny, though, is that this would make their separation much more imminent. Even after the divorce, I've had countless questions from my daughters, schools, my workplace, and my friends of changing my phone number, but I never changed my contact with my phone company. That's why my ex would call me saying,
"Listen to me, please. I beg you. I'll repay anything you want me to. I want to see the girls. Let them hear what I have to say."
Or send abundant apologetic line messages. But I remained emotionless since seeing that video. I wonder, what would my ex say if he found out his children saw that video? If I were him, I would go insane with guilt and embarrassment. Perhaps he just gave up all hope after I blocked his ass. But he disappeared from our lives completely. The house where my daughters live with me I inherited from my grandfather before I was born, so I had no intention of moving. But my ex broke his contract with the apartment he and his ex-wife were living in soon after, and went somewhere else. I didn't really want to know where he went, and I didn't really care, but a chatty relative said, "First, he cheats on his wife and abandons his children, but his second marriage didn't last at all, and he couldn't go back to work, so he quit his job, and God knows where he lives right now. Good riddance." Of course, even if I didn't have to appeal to my company about my husband cheating on me, if we were working in the same place, everyone would know, and the two of them married as a result. And if that marriage was doomed, everyone would nod, thinking that would be obvious. I wonder my ex, who lost a second home life and his job, would be thinking right around now. I do believe he regrets everything, since he wants to kneel at our front porch. But then again, cheating often leads to broken lives. Am I right?
I think it's terrifying to put pictures of people online. Even when I was a student, there was no line, and Twitter started becoming a boom when I was in middle school. Not many students had cell phones at the time, but you could say anyone who did also had Twitter. It was that popular. Around then, there was this toxic guy who would always follow me around. People knew my phone number so that they could contact me about something for club activities, but this guy would spam call until his parents got home and would raid the school too. There were also instances where he would annoyingly ask other students, "Could you go fetch Abby?" when I would go straight to cram school for pre-exam studies. It would be such a nuisance that the teachers would call our school. Apparently, he voyeured me so much with his phone and would post me, name included, on Twitter. But I didn't have a phone myself, so I never knew about this at all. Some friends would sometimes tell me, "You're being voyeured," but I didn't know what that meant back then, and I thought I was mistaken for someone else. In the end, I graduated middle school without any problems and went on with my education. Then I became an adult and got together with a certain man. I'd wanted to get married from when I was a little girl, so we gave our all in the relationship, expecting it to end in marriage. Of course, he wanted to get married too, and one day we went to greet his parents. His father was away on a business trip when we did, so I could only meet his mother that day. But together, we spilled our feelings about getting married. Later on, I got contacted by his mother, who said, "When I looked up your name online, I found so many photos of you. Even pornographic ones." I was so surprised at this, and so terrified. His mother sent me some of these photos, and every single one of them were of me when I was in middle school. The pornographic photos turned out to be something like collages. My face was superimposed on some women doing unmentionable things. It seemed he wasn't using Twitter anymore, but I knew then these were the images that Dimwit took back in middle school. My boyfriend's mother mentioned that I was in the newspaper for something, and that we talked about it when we went to see her, so she searched for me out of curiosity. Seeing those tweets, his parents told him, "We want you to break up with her. Even if you stay together, we can't give you our blessing." And also, unbeknownst to him, she told me over the phone. She apparently went on tracing the history of those tweets of me, and she found comments and stories that boasted about his crimes. Punching another student at school, stealing someone's bike, shoplifting. There was even a tweet of him in high school with a photo stating that he stole a motorcycle and got away from the cops. And she saw all that. Plus, he would state that I'm his girl in his tweets, and all this evidence led to my boyfriend's parents no longer sure whether I was involved with this meathead or not. There was a woman in some of his tweets about his crimes, and she had long, straight black hair like me. There were photos of them doing it too, and I was told I'd look exactly like her. Of course, I told her, "This isn't me! I swear to you, this is someone else!" And that there was this toxic guy stalking me back in middle school, and also that a few friends had told me that he was sneaking pictures of me. But she wouldn't have any of it, saying, "What you're wearing now is nothing but an attempt at covering up the bitch you are."
I was shell-shocked. Although they were his parents, I retorted, saying that the fact they chose to believe photos of a whore doing the unspeakable with a toxic guy they never met over the very real woman who stood in their own house. It became a complete mess. Not to mention, she had the audacity to keep that call a secret from her son, saying that if he knew, he would retaliate against them and call them the bad guys. She told me to break the relationship off. According to her, he's her wonderful, darling firstborn son, and any relationship with the cheap whore that I am would hurt him and would cause her lots of anguish. I spat back. "I've never once done anything pornographic, or anything else you accuse me of doing. My high school was one whose goal was to get its students into good universities, and it had strict school regulations. If I'd done anything you say I did, there's no way I would get a letter of recommendation from my school, and I'd get a letter of exile instead. If you don't believe me, hire a detective or something, and investigate thoroughly, if you please." She asked me to keep this transaction a secret from her son, but if I went and called off the wedding, obviously he'd ask me why. And there was no goddamn way I was gonna let myself be made a fool out of, so I spilled everything onto my fiancé. As you would expect, he exploded. When we went to meet them, my parents told him what kind of girl I was when I was younger. So the darling quickly understood that the whole thing was ridiculous. He was furious over the fact that his parents refused to believe the words of a woman who would become their daughter-in-law, as was I. He told me he would talk it over with them later, so I was waiting patiently. Then, we made the shocking discovery that his mother also harbored unbelievable toxicity. According to relatives on her side, his mother, who was saying all of these awful things about me, we found out that she also stole vehicles and shoplifted in the past, and was often in a kerfuffle with the cops. My fiancé completely lost it and yelled,
Talking shit about Abby? Who do you think you are with that past of yours? You committed more crimes than she ever will in 1,000 lifetimes! She isn't that kind of person!
That's all in the past now. That has nothing to do with all this. And she did crimes far worse than I ever did. She has that beauty queen slut face after all. So I forbid you from marrying that devious bitch dripping with crime.
His entire family was in shock at her words. My fiancé claimed he's breaking ties with her right then and there. He then carried his heavy spirit back to me and said,
I'm so sorry for all this negativity giving you such a hard time. I'm fed up with my mother, the pot who called the kettle black and harassed you about ridiculous things. I broke ties with her, so you won't be getting any negativity anymore. We're not going to see her again.
He was on his knees, begging for forgiveness. He apologized from the bottom of his heart about not noticing his mother saying nasty things about me at all, and was ashamed of himself. I hated his mother now, but I couldn't help but love him so much for choosing my side without any hesitation. I was later contacted by his father, who said,
My wife gave you such a miserable few weeks, even though you did nothing wrong. I know this won't fix everything, but I'd like to offer my deepest apologies. I'm so sorry. Like my son says, it's completely up to you if you want to break ties with us. My one and only hope is that you can be happy together.
Before hanging up, he told me he was going to think about what to do about his wife. Later, with my fiancé's suggestions, I decided to track down that turkey and make him pay well for all the atrocious things he did. I filed to an investigation company. It took no time to find him. We mounted all the evidence of his voyeuring me in the past, and of all the harm it's caused now, and reported him to the police. I didn't want to see his ugly face, and I didn't want everything to get complicated, so every transaction went through our lawyers. He apparently fought back, saying that it's stupid to get back at him for a few things he did in the past. But like hell that could defend him, and after a proper investigation of his actions, he was arrested. Of course, a lot of harm came to me because he posted all those photos on Twitter, so the compensation I demanded was quite the burden. After the matter was closed and dealt with, my fiancé and I got married. By the way, afterwards, I kept in contact with his father, who treated me so very kindly following the events, and he divorced that woman, it seems. He told his wife time and again,
Apologize to that young girl! Do you realize the enormity of what you've done?
But she argued.
I was thinking about our son, and I tried my hardest to make him leave that bitch, but she freaking blabbed! What a goddamn whore!
She showed no remorse in what she did. Even after everything, she still shut her eyes to her own faults and went on talking smack about me. All of the nagging drove his love for her into the ground, and he just left. That woman is currently struggling to keep afloat, working day and night to provide just enough for her to push by. Me and my husband both wanted to cut ties with her, so we still sometimes meet with his father for some time together. I'd nearly lost the one who would become my husband of events from 10 years ago, but he and his father saved the day. So I'm not going to let go of our happiness together. And I'm going to treasure it forever.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.